$1,000 suits, and their shiny shoes. And he comes in there with his jeans and his plaid shirt and his boots, got a little dirt on his boot and all that. And everybody kind of looks at him, and nobody talks to him or anything like that, because he doesn't quite fit in. And so he comes back Sunday after a few Sundays, and finally, at the end of the service, the pastor goes up to him and he says, before you come back here, I'd like you to pray to God and ask him just, God, how do you think I should dress when you come to our church here? And hopefully he'll give you an answer on that. So a few weeks pass and the cowboy comes back same way he was. And the pastor says, I thought that I asked you to pray about how you ought to dress here and ask God how should you be dressed. And he said, well, I did pray. And the pastor said, well, what did God tell you? He said, God said, I have no idea about the dress code. I've never been there. Oops. Well, we've all been on a journey, haven't we, to get here. It's been a long journey for me of at least 45 years, beginning when I was about 21. I started to get interested in religious matters. And maybe it's been that long or longer for you. Probably the journey's not over yet. Don't know everything there is to know yet. But things have been getting simpler for me. They have, especially since I came to Unitarian monotheism. Things have been getting simpler and simpler to me in answering the big question for me in my life. And I think the biggest question, the most important question that needs to be answered by every human being is, who is the God? Who or what is God? And why did he create human beings? What is our destiny? What is the purpose for humanity? Who cares? I've never really cared in my life about what are you going to be when you grow up, Rob? I don't know. A doctor, a lawyer, an artist, a singer, a ditch digger. What is it going to be? I don't know. I don't care. Because until I understand why I'm here, I don't care. What does it matter what I do? It has no meaning or bearing for me. And I think this is the most important information for anyone to know. And I believe that God believes that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have expended all this energy to write this book, which essentially answers that question. And our problem is, humanity's problem is, that we just don't want to believe what it is that I'm going to suggest here today. Is everybody knows what it is, almost instinctively, not quite that way, what it is that we ought to believe. But we seem to want to resist that. And we're taught to resist that, in fact. I've entitled my message today, Dare to Believe. Because I want to, amongst other things, I want to ask you to believe in a way that you never have before. I don't know why you believe the way that you do. I don't know how you came to the conclusions that you've come to. Probably the same way that I have. But I'd like you to forget about it. Just to do this exercise with me for about a half an hour. Forget how you came about what you now know. Because you're going to have to do that, in a way, as we go out and we face growing skepticism. Skepticism, I believe, is at an all-time high in the world. People are reluctant to believe anything, especially the answer to the question of who is the God, capital G, and what is my purpose for being here? There was a time probably when I could have stood up here and I said, hey, look, I've gone to school, I've read a lot of books, a lot more than you have. That's not the case. I mean, I could be someone in theory who said that to you, and you would have said, yeah, you're right. You're the man. We're just going to believe what you say. Besides that, Grandma believed it. Mom and Dad believed it. There's no reason I can see not to believe it. That is not the way it is today. And maybe you've experienced that already. And that's important to me because I'm constantly looking for a more succinct, clear way to state what it is I believe. And this thing has gotten, as I said, very simple for me. There have been a lot of books written about, bringing to fore new historical information, proving, I guess, the veracity of this book. I appreciate the, how you pronounce it, Nag Hammadi, writings. I appreciate the Dead Sea Scrolls. I appreciate all the research and all that. But if it all burned up tomorrow, I've reached that place where I don't care. Let it go. I don't need it. And I want to suggest possibility, see what you think. But for me, as I approach the skeptics in this world, I have a methodology that I have begun to use. It's worked a couple of times, and I think it's going to work overall. And maybe it'll be helpful for you. I want to share it with you. Because I believe that we don't need that information in order to convince people of who the God is and what our purpose is for our existence. I believe it's as plain as the nose on our face. We already know, we already understand within us what our destiny is. We just need to believe it. I'm not saying the Bible has no place, because I'm going to get to the scriptures. But when we face skeptics, we may not be able to start with this book. They don't care about this book. You haven't proven this book to them. You say it's the God's inspired word and document. That doesn't prove it to me just because you say it. And you have all this information. Well, I don't know. I wasn't there. Say there was a Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay. And it got burned up. You say it was from God that it got burned up. Miraculously. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. You weren't there. You don't know. I don't know. Maybe a meteor fell from the sky and burned it up. There's a lot of things we don't know because we weren't there. But do we need it? I suggest we don't. It's kind of a radical idea. But I think that you'll understand where I'm coming from by the time we're through. And hopefully, maybe there's some validity to what approach I'm going to suggest. I remember when I was around 21 years old, and I'd just been duped by a religious organization. And I thought, wow, now what am I going to do? So I'd go out at night, and this went on for weeks. And I'd go out at night, and I'd look up at the stars. I'd be out in the middle of the field. Or I'd find an empty church with the door open at night, and I'd sneak in, sit in the pew, and just, pray to God. Whoever you are, reveal yourself to me and your truth to me. Because there's so many ideas out there, so many denominations, and they all say I should believe them. And they're different. So how am I possibly going to sift through all this information unless somebody tells me, and that somebody has to be you? Or send an angel. I'll accept that if he can prove he's an angel. So I was a bit of a skeptic even back then, but, it seemed logical to me that I needed to hear from the source individual. Well, he never answered. I never saw him. He never appeared before me. Nobody did. It's like my dad said, nobody ever gave me anything. I always had to work for everything. That's kind of what happened here. So I gave up. I said, I can't figure this out. So for about 6, 7 years, I just gave up. I went about my business. Then I got serious later and I got to figure this out. But that was, almost 40 years ago now. And it has gotten simpler. I was talking to a guy down at a coffee shop in Wenatchee. They have open mic night there sometimes. And people come in and they sing songs or they've written poetry. And I remember this fellow in the millennial age bracket, by the way, which that's where your skepticism is in large measure. And he wrote this poem, I forget exactly what it was about, but it was like, well, you say this and you say that, and hey, don't judge me, what do you know, And he is nice about it, but he had these questions. And so a couple of weeks later, I saw him again, and I said, I walked up to him, I said, I really appreciate the skepticism of your generation. Because I've been a skeptic myself as well. Before it was cool to be a skeptic, I was a skeptic too. And he interrupted me and stopped and said, yes. He said, we are skeptical, but we want to know. That stuck with me. It's kind of like when you go to a restaurant. It's a restaurant you like to go to. I love this restaurant. I love the food. But sometimes you go there and they give you the steak that's all brisket. And you can't chew it. You can't digest it. And so you give it back to the waiter and the waitress. And you hope that they understand. It's not because you don't like coming there. It's that they've given you this thing you can't digest. You want to know. You want to eat the steak. You really do. And you love the idea of the steak. You just can't chew it. It's kind of like that. The skeptics want to know. Otherwise, they may not be skeptics. They'd just be, maybe atheists. But I'm not thinking about the atheists today. I'm thinking about the skeptics that want to know but can't figure out what to believe. Who is the God? Is it the gods of the Hindus? Is it the Buddhists? Is it the God of the Jews? Is it the God of Islam? Is it the God of the Methodists? Is it the God of the Baptists? Who is it? And more importantly, maybe even, or at least as important, is what in the world is he doing here with us? What is our destiny? Where are we going? What's our purpose? So I want to dare skeptics to believe. People who maybe have a harder time believing anything than anybody else. And I'd like to theoretically dare you to believe in a way that perhaps you have not at least consciously done so before. So if we don't believe in information that we already have, then what are we going to believe in? How is our skepticism going to be answered? How are we going to answer these very basic questions of life? Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. Now, there's a key right there. The substance of things hoped for. Not something you see, not something you touch, not something you feel or hear necessarily, strictly by proving through the 5 senses that it's true. But something invisible and something that is hoped for. Ephesians 1:13-18. I want to read this. Ephesians 1:13-18. Paul says, in him, that is Christ, you also, after listening to the message of truth, the gospel of your salvation, having also believed, you were sealed in him with the Holy Spirit of promise, who has given us a pledge of our inheritance. We're talking about inheritance, we're talking about the gospel, with a view to the redemption of God's own possession, the praise of his glory. And then down in verse 18, about all this, he further says, I pray that the eyes of your hearts may be enlightened so that you will know what is the hope of his calling. What are the riches of the glory? The riches of the inheritance in the saints. When I say heart, I don't mean emotion. I mean, what are your desires? What are your longings? You don't believe in anything? How about this? How about believing in your hopes and your dreams and your longings? Because that's what the gospel, I think Paul is saying, that's what the gospel is speaking to. It's speaking to the hopes and desires and longings of the human heart. The only heart you've ever had. The only heart you've ever known. Some people may try to tell you something else. Like, no, you ought to believe in things you know nothing about. You haven't felt anything. You have no, it doesn't resonate with you at all. It's a mystery. But what are the longings of your human heart? The only one you know, the one that God gave you. Therein is where you will find the answer to your question about who the God is and what he's doing with you and with humanity. For example, when I talk to somebody, I now like to say, and I plan to say more, get into a conversation just about what we're doing here, maybe just lately. And just ask them, well, I know you don't, it's a question mark, but about where we're going and what's happening here and everything. But, what does having the desires of your heart fulfilled, what does your destiny look like to you? What would you like it to be? Well, somebody said to me the other day, well, I just want to be with God. Oh, wait a minute. What do you mean by being with God? That's way too general, maybe philosophical. What does that look like, being with God? Well, let's see. I have to help this person. Well, what do you like to do? Well, I love hiking. All right. I love swimming. I like to build things. I like to be challenged by things. I love music. My destiny would include playing in a symphony, a world symphony. My destiny looks like being able to help children, being able to teach them. I'd like to take people on hikes up to Mount Rainier. I don't know what it is. Everybody's got their own dreams and their own hopes. That their human heart resonates with their human heart. The only heart we've ever had, the only heart we've ever known anything about, our longings, our desires. And so far, I haven't done this a lot, but so far I've never found anybody that could argue with this. It doesn't require any proof. Then I say this, all right. So that's what your destiny would look like. Guess what? There is only one God. There's only one entity who has a capital G to the title God, who addresses the desires of your human heart. Only one. And you can look around and you can check it out. You want to be absorbed into the cosmic consciousness? That's not what you just described to me. You want to lose your individuality? That's not what you just described to me. You want to reject everything that's physical and material and diminish it, disparage it, reject it? That's not what you just described to me. There is only one God who has the answers that address your question according to the desires of your human heart, the only heart you've ever known or had. And that God, as it turns out, is the God of this book, Yahweh. The one we know as the Father and the God of Jesus, the Messiah. Because in this book, you will find that God is going to address the desires of your human heart right here. And there's no other God that will. Check it out. I've got no problem with asking people to check it out for themselves. For example, and I don't even need to go there with you folks, but Isaiah chapter 2. You know, here's the thing. I want to live in a world where I can do all these things that I imagine, that I love to do, that resonate with me. But I want to do them in a world where you don't have 30 jumbo jets of children who die of hunger-related disease every day. That can't be right. That is not the way it's supposed to be. I know this. You know this in your heart. Skeptics will even admit this. They know this in their heart. This is not right. Nobody wants to drive around their hometown and see homeless people on all these corners who, through no fault of their own, maybe because they became sick and they don't have enough money to become unsick in this society, in this world. Or maybe because they've been saving all their lives and through no fault of their own, directly, the economy crashes, they lose their job, they lose their retirement, their life savings, the bank comes along and kicks them out of their house. That can't be right. We know that. We don't need proof of that. We already know it. I hate to see parents raising their kids, their little infants, right? Babies breastfed, raised, become adults, and then at 18 years old, they're handed a gun, sent across the ocean, and killed. After all of that work and all of that effort, just like that, snuffed out. Do we think that that's right? No. None of us thinks it's that right. I don't believe it. Not really. I've already buried one of my parents, and I rue the day when I have to bury my second one. I don't want to live without her. That can't be right. It can't be right that we die. Have not we had enough funerals? We know in our that people shouldn't be dying. We shouldn't have to be living without our loved ones. Now, it sounds ridiculous for most people to just say that. Really? I thought death was our friend. I thought that was the door into a better place, a new life. No. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, right? That death is the enemy, the final enemy that Jesus has come to destroy. So it is not acceptable that people die. It's not acceptable that people starve, are thirsty, are homeless. And this God believes that too. He addresses those desires. It says in Isaiah chapter 2, right? Speaking about Jesus, now it will come to pass in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains, and he will judge between nations and will render decisions for many people. They'll hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and never again will they learn war. Now that answers the desire, a major desire of our human hearts. This God does that. How about Isaiah 65? You know that one too. And you can say this to people if you have enough time. Maybe not that day, but maybe another time. If you wet their whistle enough, you can say, yeah, remember we were talking about what we desire and what we don't desire? You can say, well, here's what God says, this God, the only God that addresses your concerns.
For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, but be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem for rejoicing, for people for gladness. There will no longer be heard to hear the voice of weeping and the sound of crying. Of course, immortal souls don't weep and cry anyway. So who cares about that? He's not addressing that. Or an old man who does not live out his days. For the youth will die, even in the millennium. When Jesus first comes on scene and things are in transition and start to change, even then lifespans will be changed, begin to be changed. Yes, there will be immortality for the saints, but life will even begin to change. Maybe like it was a lot for the ancients who lived a long, long time, right? Anyway, it says here, they will build houses and inhabit them. The bank is not going to kick them out. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. Nobody's going to go hungry because, somebody wouldn't sell them any food. They've got the food right there. And even wine comes out of vineyards, right? So what's wrong with that? And that's another second. They will not plant and somebody else eat. And here's one I like. They will not labor in vain or bear children for calamity. No more are they going to grow to be 18 years old and be sent over to Afghanistan to get killed. They're going to live out their lives because that is how it is supposed to be. Is this approach? Now, when you first start talking to folks that are skeptical, you can't go to this book like you can finish with it, but you can't necessarily start with it. So is what I'm talking about legitimate? Is it a legitimate methodology to be able to start out without this book and to be able to ask people to think about the desires and the longings of their hearts? I think it is. And I think it's the most simple approach that we could possibly ever use. We don't really need any other proof. People know what they think. People know how they feel. If they haven't been brainwashed to believe something else, they may have to be unbrainwashed to some degree. But even this could help with that, I think. I think it is legitimate. Romans chapter 1. I'll read a little bit of this. And Paul kind of confused me for a long time, and I still don't understand everything I think that he's getting across here, although I understand that overall what he's trying to do is level the playing field between Jews and Gentiles and show everybody that the system of law that we tend to want to live under is a substitute system. It's not the real thing. And under that particular system, everyone has sinned and held accountable to God equally. I understand that's, I think, the theme, and certainly the direction he goes in Romans 1 through 3 or 4. But in Romans chapter 1, he says, I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God to save everyone. So they first also the Greek. This thing about what is our destiny. Everybody needs to know because it's the basis for life. And if we understand the correct gospel, the correct process and program that God has put into effect, we like to talk about, well, who's saved and who's not saved. Well, let me ask this though. Who's restored? Who's healed? Let's put it that way. Well, that's just an intellectual thing. No, it's not. We're talking about information that saves in the way that it heals and restores people. That's what we need to be concerned about. Let's quit debating about, well, who's going to be saved. No, who's going to be healed? That's what this information does. Saving, healing, rescuing, it's all kind of the same thing. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, the righteous man shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that among them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but became futile in their speculations. Their foolish heart was darkened. And then what follows is this comprehensive list of sin, the consequences of unbelief. But what grabs me, and I don't know if this is really his main thrust, or certainly all of his thrust, but what gets me here is he talks about the creation of the world. This earth, the universe as we know it. Even though we knew that the creator was God, we did not recognize him as the creator of the physical universe. We didn't focus on that, and we weren't thankful. So they weren't thankful. And boy, that is so true even to this day. People aren't thankful about physical material things. We have whole religions. In fact, we could even say the world religion is centered on disparaging the material creation. You need to eventually get away from it. This is just a temporary place for you. It's too bad that we're here and we have to go through this. You know, let's get away from it when we die. Let's just let our bodies rot. And then let's go someplace else, have some other kind of heart, and we'll experience other kinds of things. Let's do that. Let's not be thankful for God as creator of the material, physical universe from which we came. Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the way world religion is today? It is so basic. So, the intent of the enemy seems to be that we forget about our destiny. We forget about or reject why it is God created us and come up with some new ideas that do not address the longings of our human heart. And so those longings will never be realized because there will be no hope. But our hope is directly tied to what is physical and what is material. And we will one day be immortal human beings. But where? Right here, on this beautiful gem of a rock. And I don't know what's beyond there. I know Paul maybe alludes to something more when he says the whole creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God, because then it will be released from its corruption into a state of incorruption. Who knows what God has in stores for us as we become better agents of his to this material creation. Maybe Mars will one day look like the Earth. Maybe another galaxy. I don't know. It's speculation. But we certainly, it doesn't seem like, want to be disparaging our destiny. And those things that address the human heart, the only one that we've ever known. As I say, this thing to me has become that simple. Now, maybe I'm oversimplifying. But I don't need any of the information. I'll take it. It can be helpful and very interesting. But I personally am not going to use that approach and try to prove anything, except ask people what it is they want out of life. And they will convince themselves that this is the God. And that this is the God's plan and purpose for humanity. The most effective way I feel to reach people, especially skeptical people, is to first whet their appetites with the good news of God's kingdom. After they know about the kingdom and desire it for themselves, then explain to them how getting into it by trusting Jesus Christ to cleanse and save them from their sins, and by yielding their lives to his control. That is a quote from Miles Monroe in his book, Rediscovering the Kingdom. Now, he doesn't have everything right in this book, but I believe this applies. Wet their whistle first. Talk to them about the door, which is Jesus. But it does a tremendous amount of disservice to people when you tell them about the door, but don't tell them about what's beyond the door. And that's all I've got to say about that, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Any comments or questions? You'll have to come up here because of the feedback.
Wasn't really a highly technical presentation, so any comments that you would have on your own would be okay too. And you can't tell me that you like my tie. Because I don't have one.
You may not like my shirt, but I have it on anyway. Fools disobey God. Real fools disobey twice. That coming from, I disobeyed him once, I don't want to find out the consequences of twice. Interesting. Where are we going? Why are we here? What is the purpose? The kingdom will be established, and it will be established on the earth. Jesus has already made that clear. He told all of us, our Father in heaven will. Can you believe it? I hope you can. I hope I can. I hope all of you can. Because if we don't, then Jesus just wasted his breath. And he didn't waste his breath. I'm 71. I've got 50 years of marriage. I'm looking for the blessed hope of no more marriage.
I did not mean to convey that.
I am conveying right now. There is no marriage in the resurrection, folks. It's over. If you attain to the first resurrection, you have passed through one age, and God has brought you safely into another age, and the second death cannot touch you. And people do not know that Jesus set before them an open door. Hear, believe, act. God is faithful. God has never been unfaithful. And God has never destroyed a righteous man. And he wants us holy. And we can be holy because he wants us holy. I can't really be holy because I want to. You can't either. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see. 5 years ago was the first time I met the buzzard and the martin. The one-eyed joker from not Thibodeau. But anyway, thank you for the message. I would have hated to think that I drove 8 hours yesterday to sit here to hear nothing. So thank you.
I think I may be one of the people you're referring to, one age, but I guess I'm still probably one of them. And I've been taught exactly what you described my whole life. My heart. And I would just say that I still feel like I stand on a precipice of atheism and despair. I want more than anything all the things you just described to be true. So I guess my question is, do you still see the value that I really see from apologetics, from the kind of work that Dr. Tuggy's doing? I'm looking forward to Mr. Chandler's presentation this afternoon. Do you still see value in that, or are you appealing to something more fundamental for a guy like me that turning to that is somehow some kind of mistake and it's going to lead me in the wrong direction?
No. I said, I appreciate all the work, and not just appreciate it, probably have needed it more than I realized. And that work goes on. I hope it continues. I respect people who do that work. We need to get, some people aren't, I don't think they're in that mindset that you are, and they can't get there from where they're at. And maybe what I'm suggesting is a first step. Maybe it's not the final step. It's just the first step to get people thinking, just to maybe consider, maybe there is something more to this I should look into, and then get into the apologetics and so forth. That's fair? That's fair.
Thanks for that, Robin. I just had a question. As somebody who's dealt a lot with college students, when you ask people about their deepest desires, I think you're hoping that they come up with something sensible. Some of the students I deal with have a worldview that I call liberationism, and it's something like this. The biggest problem with humans is they can't do what they really want unhindered. They can't find their deepest desire and act on it. It's always the man telling you what to do, your parents, the government, the president, multinational corporations. So basically everybody's oppressed by the man, some outside force. And if they could just be free to find their deepest desire, it'd all be wonderful. But then they would probably think that God is the biggest, baddest man, with the biggest thumb to put over you.
Yeah.
Do you run into this, and how do you try to deal with people with that view?
I kind of wondered if someone would have that question. I guess I don't. I haven't, but I think that there is a whole block of people out there who really, Jesus talked about the different kinds of soil that the seed would land on, and if they don't care, if they've been overwhelmed by the ways of this life and this world, then perhaps they're not the people I'm specifically addressing. Although, if somehow, I still maintain that folks are apathetic or locked into wrongful ways of thinking and behavior because they've never considered anything alternative to that. And maybe if we could get them to look at, what are your real needs? What are your real longings of your heart? What you described, seems a bit shallow, right? So maybe if we could get them to look beyond that, say, well, there's really more to you than meets the eye right now. And that's the God, that's what the God, the person that God wants to address is that person. And if they can't be reached right now this way, then so be it. But I think that there are people out there who are trying to eat that gristly steak. They just can't figure out. They want to believe, but there's not enough proof for them. And this is just another proof, maybe, that's invisible, it can't be touched, that I'm hoping can reach those people who really are seeking for truth, really do desire it. Maybe this is a way that we can get to them.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. Lunch at 12 and back at 1:30, please. Thank you.